In selecting this morning's subject, I think we chose a rather important one because it comes close to the personal life of every individual. Each person lives in a world surrounded by a collective group, and to each of us, all the rest of humanity forms this collective. Thus we are an infinite number of individuals existing within one total humanity. And each person, at some period during life, often frequently, comes into conflict with this collective made up of other persons like himself. The force, the collective force of the common mind expresses itself through what we call public opinion or popular opinion. This opinion is very difficult to trace, and a number of polls and surveys have been made in an effort to find out, if possible, why the individual opinion of individuals differs from that common opinion. Some have held, and there is truth in this, that often collective opinion is more honorable, more just, and even wiser than individual opinion. There are cases, however, where the opposite is dramatically true. The chances are that the so-called public mind would be, by nature, honorable and intelligent. But it is subject to a conditioning force, which we call propaganda. And this, insinuating itself into the consciousness of our collective attitude, often distorts it and results in the terrible pressures which we find in war and in other tyrannical collective attitudes. To discover, therefore, not only the nature of this public mind, but how to protect ourselves against the ravages which it may cause, these would appear to be worthwhile procedures, essential to the living of a good life. In general, we can say that public opinion divides into two general parts. First, world opinion, the enormous mass motions of human thinking. And second, local public opinion, being composed of areas, districts, neighborhoods, families, and these more intimate associations with which we are most familiar. By the large, we are not as much concerned with world opinion as we are with the attitudes of those more or less closely around ourselves. The neighborhood, the street on which we live, our own friends gathered from numerous levels of living, and even our relatives, near and more distant. In the average person's life, there are probably anywhere from a half a dozen to 25 or 50 immediate opinion makers. In business, our associates, the firms with which we deal, the customers we seek to serve, their opinions come close to us. The opinions of the members of our church, of club, the society of which we are a working, living part, the opinions of these groups come close to us. The larger world opinion, we some way are not able to comprehend, or to vitalize. We know, for example, that situations in North Africa are touchy. We know that racial attitudes can become dangerous. But these larger problems of opinion, we do not know how to cope with. We must leave them to organized groups or various structures in society created to administer these generalities. We are, however, vulnerable to those pressureful opinions which are near at hand, whether political, economic, social, religious, or philosophical. On our level of interest, perhaps, philosophical, religious, and social opinions become of immediate importance. Looking around us, we discover the amazing phenomenon that nearly everyone is dedicated to the preservation of opinions. We begin to search into the substance of the attitudes which people hold. We find in many instances that this substance is almost non-existent. Individuals are not dedicated to facts, they are dedicated to attitudes, to convictions, to beliefs, to concepts, to ideas, and to notions. For these they have a large and complete dedication, often at the expense of facts. And as we use the word opinion as being a general attitude not well supported in many cases, we must try for a moment to distinguish between an opinion and a fact. What we call a fact today is for the most part not a certainty, but an attitude held in common by many persons. If this attitude is held by informed persons, specialists in a field, or those for whose opinions we have respect, the result is the acceptance of an attitude or a concept as a fact. In the realm of mentation, in the realm of abstract fact, we are particularly at a disadvantage. We have almost no certainties with which to work. Even such large certainties as the nebular hypothesis and the law of gravity have been questioned. We are not sure of very much in this world. What we call fact is therefore merely expertly analyzed concept or conviction. Even in our schools of exact sciences, we have exact sciences but not exact facts. Every scientific discovery is apt to assail a principle, a law, or an idea that has long been held as factual. By degrees, our entire concept of fact is being reformed, coming more and more to be regarded as a highly relative concept, a concept subject to change without notice. 100 years ago, it was a commonly held astronomical fact that the Earth was the only habitable planet. That is not held as factual today. And when we approach the trained mind with some abstraction, such as the possibility of life on another planet, the attitude today is one of increasing liberality and a tendency to say simply, we do not know. Thus, many things which we believed to be true, we now no longer hold with certitude. We believe, we think, we hope, but we are not certain. The gradual death of certainty has had a considerable effect upon public opinion. In some cases, it has undermined confidence in knowledge confidence in realities of every kind. In other instances, it has impelled us to a broad rebellion against tradition, a rebellion which also can be led to excess or extreme by the mind. Out of it all comes one point that I think is valuable to us, namely that opinions are not necessarily scriptural revelations. Attitudes are not certainties. And the public mind, like the private mind, can be subject to error and is subject to distortion and exaggeration. We must come gradually then to the realization that it is not a moral and spiritual duty of the individual to conform with the attitudes and opinions of others. He is not bound by society to common agreement. He is bound by society to a common struggle for existence and improvement. He is duty-bound not to create a situation detrimental to the survival of a socialized existence. This does not mean, however, that he must forever agree with the opinions of his times. Opinions also, particularly the collective type, are themselves in a state of eternal change. That which is held with certainty in one generation is rejected utterly in another. And perhaps there is no field of public opinion in which this inconsistency is more obvious than in what we term style. Styles in clothing, in commodities, in automobiles. Styles are forever changing. Each style, when it is introduced, is declared to be the newest, the best, and to a measure the final. 6 months later, all is changed. And the individual who had the pleasure and the smug satisfaction of being up to the minute finds himself 6 months hence in a very retrograde position, which he must do something about immediately. He has passed out of fashion before the commodities were paid for, and he must immediately go into debt in order to remain true to this concept of fashion. Public opinion accepts fashion, not necessarily because it is so minded of itself, but because it is under constant pressure of propaganda and advertising. The advertiser is desperately desirous of merchandising his products. In order to do so, he must continually cater to certain instincts in human nature. One of these instincts is love of novelty. Another instinct is love of change. And perhaps a third is the desire to excel or exceed others on some level of attainment or possession. Consequently, the public mind has come to what we call this condition of the adoration of innovation. The new must be the best, and all things that are not new gain gradually a kind of negative opinion. They become decadent, so-called. They lose their attractiveness for us, and they drift into a general innocuous state, a state of undesirability. There they remain for 50 to 100 years, and then blossom out triumphantly as antiques. Then we desire them as never before. But between new and antique is a slough of despond, through which the individual must bear his worldly goods. Thus, the love of the new and of innovation, while it leads progress, there is no question about it, it makes progress possible, can also by excess become an obsession. It can keep a person in debt for their entire lifetime. It can destroy major securities in the desperate effort to appear prosperous and contemporary. Unless we bring certain mentation to bear upon these things, unless as individuals we have minds of our own and are willing to use them, recognizing that we have been endowed with the power of potential judgment, and that by the exercise of this power, rather than by common agreement with others, we indicate the strength of our own characters. Things that excite us and intrigue us in the term of the new or of innovation, these things may be good, but also they may be merely trash. Everything that is new is not good. Everything that is old is not worthless. It is judgment that must determine these matters. And judgment, of course, represents the power of the individual to withstand collective pressure and be himself, accepting for himself those things which he regards as essentially right and proper. Extravagance is an escape from judgment. It is the individual becoming addicted to desires which are inconsistent with the practical available funds which he has. Not to use judgment means to be confronted ultimately with fear, worry, debt, suffering, and sickness. Thus, in the matter of styles, we show this tremendous pressure of collectives upon weak-minded persons, individuals who simply lack the integrity for self-decision. Now, in clothing styles, there's a point that it seems to me to be indicative of our attitude on many other subjects. Strangely, but unfortunately, the human body is so constituted that it must inevitably meet the problem of clothing on a rather basic and simple foundation. There are only a certain number of ways in which fabrics and materials can be draped upon the human chassis. They may be tucked in here or pulled out there, but ultimately we exhaust possibilities. Unfortunately, we are not able to adapt the chassis to the style. We cannot change ourselves continuously to meet the fads. Out of all of this comes a rather interesting point, namely that the individual is an individual. He is not cattle. He is not merely a type or a species like horses or birds of one kind or another. Unfortunately, unlike birds, he does not have his style structure built in. The bird has no problem. We can never equal it for beauty, any more than we can equal the magnificent tinted wings of a butterfly. But man generally discovers that there are certain kinds of clothing, certain types of adornment that are suitable to him. He is an individual. We cannot all look alike and look well. That which is suitable to one person is totally unsuitable to another. Thus, the mass motion of fashions may in each instance favor some, but it will place others at a terrible disadvantage. People look very badly in expensive, fashionable things because they are not suitable. Out of it must ultimately come the realization that each person is a fashion law unto himself. having discovered that which is suitable, which to the best advantage makes him most comfortable, most well-appearing, that this is his style, and that it is his moral duty almost to cling to it, regardless of passing fashions. Because if he does not, he is apt to be fashionable and appear ridiculous at the same time. Thus each person has a fashion law to himself. His coloring, his structure, these things suggest certain types of clothing. To depart from such natural requirements is ultimately to lose distinction and appearance. So instead of being bound by these mass motions, the person who is thoughtful chooses that which is most fitting for himself. And if more did this, we would find less regimentation, also greater imagination, and the individual using his own faculties rather than simply depending upon the pressures of his environment. The more he does his own thinking, the more he makes his own decision, the better person he is, and the better equipped he is to face the essential problems of life in which collective decision cannot be helpful. If, however, we learn to drift in everything, drift in the design of an automobile, drift in kind of shoes we wear, coats, hats, clothes, if we make no decisions of our own in hardly any field of endeavor, we ultimately lose the power to make decisions, ultimately become drowned in this sea of common attitudes, which may or may not be suitable to our requirements in any way. Thus, to be up to the mode is not the end we are searching for. It is that the individual shall have the power to live according to the convictions of his own conscience. And if he never uses conviction, never applies it, he naturally has very little available in any real emergency in which he needs it. So he can exercise his self-directives in small, simple ways, thus strengthening them for the real needs that arise. Public opinion also affects us intangibly. It sets upon us certain molds or patterns. In education, for example, we have a sorry case of public opinion that has gone bad. We have individuals following religiously and devoutly policies long established, policies which never have worked and never will, policies which have failed for thousands of years to produce the end product that we desire, that is, the educated person. They produce an individual only who is equipped according to the conceits of his times, who is able to mold himself into public opinion, adjust with it, accept its guidance and almost its sanctity, and proceed to make all the mistakes that distinguished his ancestors. There is no point, of course, in education in which this opinion-making instrument is more obvious than in the higher brackets of learning. The individual may graduate from grammar school and still remain comparatively an individual. He might graduate from high school and still be a person. But if he graduates from college without being deformed in some manner, he is indeed fortunate. One of the things that higher education attempts to do, apparently, is to turn the individual against his own common sense. It tries to impose upon him a stratum of sophistication, of worldliness, of so-called higher nonsense, from which he will have a terrible time recovering. It is in college that the person begins to lose his ideas and his ideals, and gradually becomes inoculated with the prevailing cynicism and skepticism. He regards this as essential. He is taught, subtly but definitely, that the simple attitudes and beliefs of his parents and those with whom he has long associated are simply inadequate, superstition-ridden, and, of course, inevitably mid-Victorian. With this armament, the child is not only deformed, but is placed in a frame of mind in which it is very difficult to help him back again into a normal attitude. So these pressures that are placed upon us demand eternal vigilance from us, or we get into deeper and deeper difficulty. Another very common cause of public opinion molding at the present time is our entertainment world. We have in motion pictures, radio, television, theater, in these brackets we have a very powerful psychological influence at work. It has been noted again and again that the last 50 years, the entertainment world has fallen to pieces. In the first place, the term entertainment has been completely lost. What we term entertainment today is mostly abnormal psychological clinic, where the individual is enabled to observe the details of the collapse of other human beings. He is permitted to be very close to the morbid situations with which the original author attempted to vitalize his plot. In the first place, most of the stories are imaginary, where, if they be true, the details have been handled in a totally fictitious manner. From a true standpoint of education, the stories are comparatively worthless. Therefore, their excuse as being of serious significance is not valid, unless you happen to hear or see a story or a play that is marked and clearly stated as documentary. Unless it is specifically related to a particular incident, there is very little probability that it is valid. But persons watching these things gradually take on the attitudes of this collective entertainment field. And there are a great many persons today who are losing faith in their world, who are losing faith in respect for each other, and are also starting on wild programs of individual analytical counseling as the result of entertainment programs. These are not essentially good. Perhaps one of the best ways of looking at it would be to realize that these various dramas, even assuming that they were true, and of course assuming, as we must, that they could happen, because almost anything can happen, represent very small fragments of society. They represent isolated cases, magnified out of all proportion, and thrown into the consciousness of millions of persons without due cause or reason. They come under the general heading of sensationalism. They are created and presented for one purpose only: profit. They are catering to the idea that we will turn on our television or spend our money to see some morbid, gruesome, or remarkable situation, calling it entertainment. Actually, it is not entertainment. It is something that is not good for us, and certainly not good for younger people. If we had at night a nightmare of the same quality as a performance we had seen on television, we would probably look for a physician. We would declare that we had been subject to a horrible tragedy in our sleep. So public opinion, as presented by all these conflicting, competitive makers of soap, cigarettes, and beer, they become powerful subconscious forces exercising an hypnotic influence upon the public mind, an influence that is essentially meaningless, cluttering up the mind with non-essentials, and may also in many instances be actually detrimental. About the least you can say for them is that these pressures are confusing. They clarify nothing. They direct us to no reasonable end. Going back, therefore, into the study of this whole situation, a total look at it, the responsibility for the whole business lies essentially in the human mind. None of these productions come from any other source. They may be inspired by any of our faculties or perceptions or reflective powers, but their presentation is a mental phenomenon. They come to us out of our own thinking, and we discover that our own attitudes and our own relationships to life make us vulnerable or bring us into detrimental association with these notions. If, therefore, we belong to a certain strata of personal mentality, we are exposed to all other pressures in that strata. For example, if we have a certain prejudice within our own minds, we listen attentively to everything bearing upon that prejudice, particularly upon our side of it. And gradually we come to the decision that there is ample support for our prejudice. If, however, we do this, we should, with equal thoroughness and care, listen to everything against our prejudice, to see whether it is just or not. This we fail to do in most cases. Our purpose not being to arrive at fact, our purpose being to have our own attitude supported, regardless of the cost or consequences. Thus, in our minds, we are absorbed in certain pressure patterns, and what we call collective public opinion is made up also of large groups of pressure patterns. If it would be possible to analyze the public mind as a composite, it would probably be not so different from the individual mind, because after all it must be made up of these tiny mosaics of individual intellect. The public mind has more on it, however, in the form of problem and material for thought than the private mind, because the public mind covers every phase of life, every level of thinking. But within this public mind, there are numerous groups made up of any number you can conceive of, from maybe a half a dozen persons to maybe 5, 6, 7, 800 million persons. The larger of these patterns become tremendous public forces, as for example religion, where we have a public mind or a composite mind of Christendom, representing perhaps 800 million human beings. We have public mind on great problems, such as national defense. We have public mind on economic problems. There are these tremendous groups. Then there are smaller groups, down all the way to some small local confraternity of a half a dozen individuals dedicated to securing a public swimming pool for the town. All these different groups, each bent upon its own purposes, each attempting in one way or another to justify its own attitudes. These surround us and invite our participation. It would not be fair to say that the perfectly balanced, well-controlled, strongly integrated individual mind has to be a victim of any of these groups. It does not have to. It does not have to accept or assume anything that it is not willing to accept or assume. But the individual mind of the person is also a tumbling ground for whimsies. It has all kinds of peculiar notions of its own. It likes certain things and dislikes other things. It would love to see legislations for something or against something. This is obvious when we go to the polls, for it is quite certain that each individual, feeling that he is serving the greatest good, votes. And yet most persons differ as to what would constitute the public good. Therefore it is difficult, if not almost impossible, to secure a unanimous vote on any subject. The individual, having certain negative attitudes within himself or certain peculiarities of attitudes, pressures, prejudices, phobias, complexes, looking around him in his environment, immediate or general, usually makes a heartening discovery. Whatever his peculiarities may be, someone else has organized them and made a complete composite out of them. Whatever attitude you have would instinctively make you a member of something. Somewhere in the world there are other people with the attitude you are holding. If, for example, you have a certain religious prejudice, you will find by a little careful thought that you probably can find a public mind, perhaps composed of several million persons, whose religious prejudice is exactly like your own. Now this is to the individual a heartening discovery. He suddenly finds the security of number. Whereas before, perhaps he was a little uncertain as to whether his prejudice was what it should have been. If he discovers that it has somewhere been organized, has a name and a board of directors, then his prejudice is solid, proper, and true. He verges toward this group, which shares the same opinion with himself. It supports him, he supports the opinion of others. And first thing you know, he belongs to a little private universe of individuals who agree with him. He finds that there are such persons. And when he finds that there are 50 or 500 or 50,000 of them, he is almost certain that he is right, that this is now something for a crusade. What he has forgotten, of course, is that this little bubble, whether it be a dozen persons or a million persons, that this little bubble of group organization is floating upon the surface of 2 3/4 billion persons, most of whom know nothing about his prejudice and care less. But the few who share his viewpoint become more important than the hundreds of millions or even billions that do not. Thus, public opinion in its various pockets and its little vortices of organization will sustain almost anything. But if we look beyond, it will also absorb or dissolve almost anything. Therefore, to the individual, the greatest danger of public opinion is that he will find some persons who have the same mistaken attitudes as himself. These will form his world. They will help to lock him in his mistake. He will help to lock them in theirs. And the larger issues of things go unconsidered. Obviously, it is also true that lack of wisdom is more common than wisdom. It is therefore quite reasonable that large groups of persons should be wrong, and that smaller groups of persons, increasingly small, as in minorities, may be more correct or more true in their thinking. Why do we qualify this statement? We qualify it because behind and beneath man's mental education and miseducation, there is a primitive, natural, instinctive recognition of value. Primitive man is almost disgustingly honest. He is so honest that we are afraid of him. He is honest in the way that the small child is honest. Not an enlightened honesty, but an almost supernatural grasp of value. Primitive man is difficult to deceive. Before you can deceive him, you must civilize him. And after you civilize him, he'll believe anything. So behind the great motion of peoples, we must realize that probably a half of the earth's population still belongs in an essentially primitive group, an unlettered and unschooled group, or a group in which education is so slight a factor that survival still depends upon individual intuitive initiative. The individual must solve his problem. He must find ways of survival. He must meet immediate needs by the simplest, most direct and practical attitudes and activities. This group would be essentially nearly right. It would have this tremendous, almost inspired quality, an inspiration based upon the need of survival, the intuitive grasp of that which will make survival possible. So-called cultivated man has lost the instinct for survival. Therefore, he is able to threaten his own survival and endanger the survival of others. For this reason, we say that beneath world opinion there is a folk level, a basic psychological integrity that can be of great value. Unfortunately, however, most primitive peoples have now been brought under the influence of powerful propaganda systems, and by degrees the primitive instinct of value is disappearing, only to remain in the most isolated areas. But there is a common integrity underneath the attainments of man. And these attainments very often obscure it, keeping it from having its natural expression. Instead of building upon value, man has built away from value. This is one of his great tragedies. If, however, we consider public opinion as it is today, we have to realize that we live in a world composed of it, in which it has a pressureful part in every one of our careers. The only solution lies in our ability to discriminate, to find ways and means of evaluating the pressure of the public or collective mind. To do this, we must escape from our sense of awe. We must no longer revere this public mind as like unto God. We've got to get away from the fact that a number of believers constitutes a factual foundation for belief. It does not. The number of believers is composed of persons of similar attitudes, but these attitudes are not necessarily correct. If, therefore, the question is brought up and someone seeks to overwhelm our own judgment with some broad, unsemantic statement such as, well, everyone knows that so-and-so is true. It is not so. Everyone does not know. And for the most part, does not care. Everyone is ourselves and two or three persons. Everyone is our own interpretation of what other people think. If in the course of life we find three persons who agree with us, this is termed everyone. If it's only two, we say most people. If it is only one, we say some people. And if it's only ourselves, we say this is gospel truth. We have no sense of perspective on these things. So never be overwhelmed by being told that you are out of step with everyone. This could not be true. Somewhere there lurks someone who agrees with you. Never, therefore, have your decisions made for you by persons of doubtful integrity. Why should we accept the attitudes of individuals when we would not even want to live with these individuals? Why should we allow their thinking to enter our lives when we would not want them in our houses? Why should we allow the manufacturer and the advertiser to think our thoughts for us and to cause us constant responsibility and debt, which we cheerfully assume in order that he may break a sales record? Wherein lies the virtue of these things? Actually, we would have better products, better services in this world, and a better integrated society if the individual demanded levels of value. If he insisted that things be done well, they would be done well. He is still the great consumer, the great buyer, and his will is law if he wishes to make it so. But he prefers to drift along, saving his mental energy for other activities. And incidentally, what are these other activities? Usually, little more than schemes to find ways of paying his bills or escaping them utterly. We are not using this mind energy so continuously and so nobly that it would not pay us to pause and examine our failure to be reasonably critical. Public opinion can and often does whip groups of people into mob action, as in the traditional Southern lynching situation. It can lead to the most fantastic political activities, notably meaningless, but accepted. Public opinion has now gradually also brought a broad defeatism into the life of the individual. It has taken for granted that nothing can be done about these things, that we must laugh them off, forget them, or assume that they are the natural workings of the Homo sapiens. They are not any of these things. They are merely a pyramiding of indifferences, of neglect, of failure to use the faculties and powers with which we have been so wonderfully endowed. We must then face two issues. One is to move with public opinion. The other is to stand our ground. Now, if we move with public opinion, we appear at the beginning to come into an easier state. But the products of public motion in the last 500 years have not been encouraging. We have gained something, it is true. We have made some progress, but at a terrible price. We have gained liberty at the price of the Spanish Inquisition, the Reformation, the Armada, and probably 50 wars, the French Revolution, the American Revolution, and the Russian Revolution. Misery and pain. We have bought a semblance of liberty. And now that we have it, we do not use it. We sacrifice voluntarily the liberty we have earned cheerfully upon the altar of collective opinion and do exactly as we're told to. Liberty seems to be worth dying for, but not worth living with. And we take this attitude every day. If then we are willing to drift, following every other social motion, accepting the environmental delinquencies of our friends and neighbors as a code of conduct, we will land where they land. We will lose our home because we did not finance it intelligently. We will be in debt until we have ulcers. We will follow all the peculiar notions of our time and end as this general group has ended, in confusion and discord, with a very good chance of broken homes, very good chance of delinquent children. We will just drift and take the chance, as others seem to be doing. We cannot find among these others very many successful people, if we look carefully. Some have a little money and nothing else, and they are among the least successful. Some have poor health, broken homes, constant dissension and discord, worries, fears, and doubts. They are the drifters. They are the ones who form this vast drifting opinion. And if we follow it, we shall come out no better than they do. We shall have only one satisfaction, namely that we have been up to the minute in our stylization. We have lived as everyone else lives. Therefore, we are regarded as contemporary people. That is, for a moment. In a little while, we shall be included among the extinct people. Against this is the possibility of the individual being an individual, living according to the things that he believes to be correct. This will gain him a strange reputation. He will be considered eccentric. If he's rich enough, he probably will be considered to be a powerful individual. If he is not so rich, he will probably be a crank. But in spite of what he is called, he is a person who is living a life of his own. This does not mean that he is annoying or damaging anyone. He should not be doing this. But he should be making constant and numerous decisions as to how he will spend his money, how he will live, what will interest him, what books he will read, what theater he will attend, what concerts he will choose. He should be doing things because he needs to do them, wishes to do them, or knows why he is doing them. Perhaps the last is the most important. To do things because we know why we should do them. This individual is making a series of decisions. Every day he is planning his own purposes. He is not inclined to force his attitudes upon others. This is wrong. But he is not inclined to merely lie down and let the world roll over him. If he learns to make these decisions in his small daily problems, he will develop an intensive decisional power. He can make valuable and important decisions. He can decide what kind of a world he is going to live in. And he will discover, strangely enough, that he can live in it. And probably, in the end, that others have had the same thinking on these matters, that he is not alone any more than the collective opinioner is alone. But he will find himself with a group of interesting and dynamic characters. He will find certain subtle affinity with those persons who have made the world grow. We would never have had a Socrates, a Plato, a Buddha, Confucius, or Jesus if we had not had within ourselves the power to live above the common level of error. We would never have had progress if certain individuals had not dared to be themselves and to pay for individuality, if necessary, with every bit of strength and life that they possessed. But do not think that conformity is cheap. Keeping up with public opinion today will keep anyone bankrupt and will also ultimately destroy their lives. If we must be a martyr to something, why should it be to public opinion, which is itself constantly vacillating, inconsistent, and non-directive? If we must make a sacrifice, let us sacrifice for some cause or some purpose that is meaningful, either to ourselves or to other people. Socrates gained a magnificent reputation for nonconformity. He paid for it with his life, but he lived. He was a person. He did his own thinking. He dared to be himself. The fate of our whole world depends upon people who dare to be themselves. If they are not willing to take this great risk, there will be no progress. We will drift along under one pressure or another until perhaps atomics solves it for us by eliminating us. All the things that must be done to bring this world into security and peace must be accomplished by individuals. This sorry hope that we have that sometime there's going to be a universal reformation by the collective itself has no grounds upon which to be built. It has never proved to be so since the beginning of time. Every time we have a motion of groups, this motion is spearheaded by the power of individuals. It is true that public opinion has within the surface and beneath its surface a tremendous vulnerable need. Everyone wants to be better. That is part of public opinion. Public opinion wants peace, wants happiness, wants security. Public opinion wants children to be brought up properly, wants to overcome crime and poverty and war and sickness. Public opinion does not want to suffer. But in itself, it cannot accomplish this end. The only thing that it can do, and ever has done, it has been to rally around central focal points. Strong individuals have in a number of occasions become the focal point for a release of public opinion. But without these rallying centers, opinion itself flows without organization and without conviction. So out of this tremendous reservoir of the public mind can be brought groups to support a diversity of different attitudes and ideas. Groups can be found that will violently support war simply because of selfishness or ignorance. Groups can be found that will sustain any kind of intolerance that might be recommended. There are masses of people who just want to be against something. But there are also levels and groups of persons who want to grow, who want to help, want to be part of really constructive programs. These levels are not so large, but they exist and can be called upon. And it is the defense and support brought by these groups, backing up great leaders like Socrates or Buddha or Jesus or Confucius or Muhammad, that have ultimately permitted these doctrines to become dominant in human affairs. Individuals have emerged, and then social strata have come forth to support and sustain these individuals. Sometimes society martyred the individual first, but gradually society has built the strong, sustaining, surviving power of these ideas. Thus, the progress of the world is the result of persons who dare to be themselves. If they are right, they will live. If they are wrong, they will perish. If what they do advances the world, they will ultimately be recognized. If their decision is not proper, they will ultimately be forgotten. But in any instance, they are individuals. They are persons who are using the faculties with which they have been endowed. We cannot too strongly recommend that every person interested in philosophy and in religion and in ideals and mysticism, metaphysics, all these subjects, should strive to be an individual, should strive to maintain a personal attitude uncontaminated by prejudices and criticisms and things of that nature. One of the wonderful powers that the human mind possesses is its potential ability to be happy. Happiness, however, arises usually from individuality. The collective group of persons is seldom happy. It may be reasonably contented, but it has the contentment of what Longfellow calls the dumb-driven cattle. It is only the individual who is capable of dynamic happiness, the kind of happiness that sustains and lifts the person to a sense of magnificent achievement. Real, deep, abiding, consistent happiness. Happiness that cannot be destroyed a moment later by some misery. Happiness arises out of the consecration of the mind and of the emotions and the whole psychic nature to purposes and programs and policies that are adequate. The best chance of happiness we have is to attain a degree of individuality in which we do not move with the tides of human affairs. The ocean of life is constantly moving with waves and currents. And these waves have their high places and their low places. And the tides rise and fall. And in the life of the collective body of mankind, joy is followed by sorrow, heights of achievement by depths of loss. And man lives in a constantly alternating cycle of advantages and disadvantages. It is only by individual initiative that man can put a rudder on his ship and steer a course across this sea of circumstance. If, therefore, he desires to have an integrated life, a life in which purpose and organization have helped to bring a balanced mood, a consistent, constructive creativity, the person to achieve these ends must cultivate his own resources. He must become a personal liver. He must begin to live according to his own convictions, with a certain indifference to those who do not wish to live that way. Not an unkind indifference, and certainly not the attitude that he is better than someone else. Just the attitude that he prefers to be different, that he prefers to be himself, that he has projects and purposes and plans, and that he is not going to waste them all, forget them all, in order to continue the pursuit of the trivial. He will use his leisure according to his own understanding, and not simply waste it because others do. That he will have a proper attitude on religion, whether others are tolerant or intolerant. He will be just and thoughtful, and he will worship according to his own conviction. He will gradually discover something that perhaps he would not expect to find. And that is that living as an individual is not all penalty. It conveys also certain definite distinctions. It gives the individual the right to his own humanity. He becomes a person. Others ultimately recognize him as a person. And if his individuality is based upon judgment and wisdom and understanding and natural affection, he will be recognized and for the most part honored. He will find that others secretly wish they could do the same thing, and that beneath the surface of this mass motion there is a vast amount of individual discontent. People want, in many ways, to be better than they are, but lacking inducement, lacking incentive, and lacking example, they are not certain in what direction to turn. Having no adequate leadership on an ethical level, they are bereft of vital integration. They have no way of stimulating themselves. They are not sufficiently informed. That education should produce persons who are unable to find ways of accomplishing their own ideals is a very sad commentary, but nevertheless it is true. Thus, the example of an integrated life is important. So how are we going to do it now? How are we going to move away from public opinion? Are we going to go out like St. Simon of Stylites and sit on a tower in the Libyan desert? No. Are we going to cancel our subscriptions to all our newspapers and magazines? No, they'd be very unhappy. Are we going to discontinue all cooperation with industry and economics? No. We are not going off the deep end, because that is the place where we find the majority of miserable people. We're going to realize that we are born in this world essentially with a capacity that no other creature has, namely the possibility of becoming trained observers. The purpose of life is to grow and to improve through contact with living itself. Thus, attempting to escape life and escape contact is no solution. It is perfectly possible to read the newspaper without falling under its influence. It is perfectly possible to live in society, make all proper and necessary adjustments, and still not worship society. It is perfectly right and proper to live in an economic or industrial system, earn an honest living, support a family, and raise children without believing that this industrial system is a divine revelation. It is also possible to do all things as they are done, without accepting the fact that this is the best way of doing them. It is very conceivable that we can live in this world, meet all natural responsibilities, and practice all social graces without falling complete victims of the hypnosis of it. We can observe things, study them, reason out why people do what they do, without, as a result, loving some people and hating others. It is perfectly possible to understand why we are plagued with our present political situation. And we can come to this conclusion without hating politics, hating politicians, or trying to create a third, fourth, or fifth party. We can understand through things. The moment understanding comes, violence ends. Because in the same measure that we are trying to understand, we gradually learn to realize that other people must try to understand us. This world is composed of human beings doing mysterious things for uncertain reasons. Education helps to clear up the mysteries and the uncertainties. We can gradually see why people act as they do. And out of the same conceit, why we act as we do. Coming to know in the end that we act as we do, not necessarily because of the sovereignty of a divine power within us, but that like most others, we are selfish, indifferent, narrow-minded, and therefore we got into the condition we're in. Out of a little careful thoughtfulness, we get a wonderful degree of personal orientation. We observe why others are ridiculous, but finally come to discover why we are, which is a most valuable find, if we can make it. Gradually, we learn to recognize the power, to use the faculties that we have, to become increasingly aware of the nature of the world. And in our relationship to other people and to ourselves, a correct diagnosis is 2/3 of the remedy. After a little thoughtfulness and really honest examination, we realize that the world is not made up of very good people and very nasty ones. The world is made up of a great number of very uncertain people, who under pressures of one kind or another are apparently better or worse than they really are. That underneath all of this, on all levels and all planes, the world is made up of very hurt people. People who are unhappy and do not know why, and are not going to find out why very easily under existing conditions. We're going to learn that what we call a despot is really a very sick, stupid person. And that all these terrible bugaboos that we have built up about one thing or another are mostly in our own minds. The world is not composed of people who hate each other. It is composed of people who fear each other. Because not knowing each other, we are always afraid of mystery. And out of fear of each other will come war. Not because of natural dislike, but because of propagandaed prejudices. And after it's all over and the propaganda has ceased and things have settled down again, no one can understand how or why they were so foolish. It is therefore made up of human beings who do not use the power within themselves to determine the kind of living they are going to do. If a highly intelligent, highly educated nation like Germany had been composed of individuals who knew what was right and believed it, Adolf Hitler would not have had a chance. And the same condition can arise anywhere. As long as individuals are perfectly content to drift along on the level of creature comfort alone, willing to fight for anything that gives them $1, regardless of whether it's good or bad, nations will be vulnerable, individuals will be insecure, and progress will be slower than it should be. Now, we can't hope to change all these things. But each individual can cease to be that way himself. He can become an individual in a world and realize that this world cannot touch him unless, first of all, he sells out. Unless he compromises his own principles, he cannot be injured by the collective situation. He may go through a series of transformations which others would call injury. But if his own understanding is straight, he comes the nearest to security of any person in this world. And to get this perspective means a gradual diminishing of our subconscious acceptance of everything around us, particularly of the opinions of other people. I've observed that most people in trouble are to some degree, in some way, just a little bit dishonest. They have perhaps absolute economic honesty, but they are dishonest about themselves. They are trying to believe that they know more than they do. They want to be thought better than they are. They want to gain reputation for abilities or attitudes which are not natural or sincere to them. In some way or other, they are not honest. And the moment the individual is not honest, he comes under the despotism of an entire world of compromises. Public opinion is the great compromiser today. It will drift in any direction where the effort is least. Man, in order to grow, must gradually drift in the direction of continuous effort. He must realize that one decision is more important to his character than 100 compromises. That when he does it because he believes it is right, he alone justifies his action. To do it because other people do it does not mean anything in terms of character. If what he does is the same as the other person, that means that he believes that the other person is also right. And if he performs right action, he will perform as certain others do. But merely to accept the pressure of popular attitude is to drift in constant conflict. Nothing that we believe lasts as long as we do. We must change our minds and our attitudes continuously with this vacillating and uncertain public mind. It is much better then to have a purpose and a plan and stay with it. We cannot therefore too strongly advise all sincere persons who are seeking to grow to begin to think that they have a right to think, that they have a right to the color wallpaper they like, assuming, of course, that they can gain some common understanding with their family about it. But just because all the world says it should be blue does not mean it must be. The fact that all the world says that a certain thing is a certain way does not make it so. The only way we will ever know how things are is through our own personal investigation. What makes others happy may not make us happy. Collective diagnosis of ailments will not be, generally speaking, accurate in individual cases. Each thing must be worked out by the person who is building a life, who is finding his way of arming his character against the vicissitudes of experience and existence. We have a right to the strength of internal support. When we know what is right, we must do it. The individual who does not keep faith with the convictions that he knows is making the most dangerous compromise of all, one which is going to psychologically demoralize him. For many psychological ailments rise from conflict between conscience and conduct. What we believe, if we do not do it, we lose respect for ourselves. And that is the most serious loss that any human being can suffer. So public opinion is just actually unimportant. Socrates, discoursing once before quite a group of people, was stopped in the middle of a sentence by a vast burst of applause. The old philosopher looked rather surprised, turned to one of his associates, said to him, "What foolish thing have I said that all men should thus applaud me?" And this remains true today. If too many agree with us, we should begin to be suspicious of our own conduct. If we agree with too many, we should begin to try to analyze whether we have any mental backbone at all. If we do what everyone does, we can be rather certain we are wrong. And if everyone thinks we're wonderful, there's probably something rather seriously the matter with us. If, however, those who are most thoughtful, most intelligent, most experienced, those in whom values are most obvious, respect us and admire us, then in all probabilities we have important values. Thus only persons better than we are can give us criticism that is essentially valid. We should observe the opinions of all about ourselves. We should not overlook the fact that we are full of faults and others will find them. But at the same time, we should not accept the judgment of everyone unless in our own hearts we are convinced that their judgment is right. If through our own selfishness and stupidity we have limited our perspective and are fooling ourselves, then anyone can help us. But not merely to agree with them, but to explore and to consider. Advice is given not to be accepted or rejected, to be believed or denied, but to be examined. And if found worthy and proper, to be accepted, regardless of who it comes from. These honesties relieve us from this mass hypnosis. They remind us that things do not happen in mass motions of this nature, that we must make a better life happen for us. Public opinion should never worry us, because actually there is nothing that is worrying public opinion less than we as individuals. Whatever it says about us, it has said about others and will say about others. There is nothing deader than yesterday's news. What the world thinks about us will never save us. But what we think about the world, if it is intelligent, may help us to save ourselves, and ultimately perhaps to confer a real benefit upon others who are able to understand. Thus we do not have to be part of a vast motion because other people are. We are not a school of fish or a flock of birds, nor are we a hive of bees. We are individuals, and by using the individual right to think, we preserve the individual right to grow. And if we use it, life's challenge brings growth. helps us to grow in the midst of others who do not grow or do not appear to be growing. Helps us to make direct decisions. Whether they are consistent with public opinion or not is not important. Public opinion will not pay our bills. Therefore, we are not in debt to it. We are in debt only to ideas, to principles, and to truths, through the application of which we organize our own lives. So try to think of yourself not as something being lambasted and bombarded constantly by public opinion, but merely as an individual who has unwisely allowed public opinion to move in upon him. It has paid no bills, it has never paid the rent, and it has never kept the lease. Therefore, it can move out. The individual can create his own world, using his faculties to find all good in things around him, understanding them, analyzing them, organizing the mysteries of life, but always refraining from committing himself so that he can no longer be the governor of his own conduct, keeping forever his right to act in his own name, and keeping forever his right to decision in his own mind. It is better for him to make his own mistakes and learn than to make the collective mistakes of ages. And he may, if he is wise and thoughtful, find a way of life that will prevent him from becoming involved in the common confusion that wastes our resources and time and destroys our health. We must win our fight for normalcy, and we must do it by being in complete control of our own natures, so that we can direct them and guide them to the ends which, to our understanding, are proper and just. And the time is up, so we'll now pause again. In recent years, there's been quite a change in the attitudes of the public concerning the man's place in the home. Up to very recently, we felt that the home was the citadel of the woman. Today, we are beginning to conceive the possibility the woman is going to go out into the world and that man's place will be in the home. We're not sure of this yet, but there are indications. Certainly it is that a new psychology of family is arising. A psychology which shares, as never before, the important values of home and life. So next Sunday morning, we're going to try to analyze and discuss the new arrangement or organization of home, which is now going to center around both man and woman, rather than only around woman. And the integration of man into the new concept of home, something which is certainly in line with evolutionary trend, and is part of the experience of human consciousness, that each individual is all things, and that it is not possible to divide the experiences of human beings into absolute categories and separate them as we have long had a tendency to do. Anyway, we think you will find it interesting. I'd like to call to your attention that beginning tomorrow and extending for 3 weeks, we will have the largest and most extensive showing of our books, manuscripts, material of that nature that we have ever had at Robinson's store downtown on the 7th floor in their gallery department. Many of the choicest items from our collection will be exhibited there. And you are invited to come or tell your friends who might be interested. As you know, our library facilities have never been such that we've been able to have a comprehensive exhibition on our own premises. Therefore, you will have an opportunity to see many of the treasures of our collection which have not previously been exhibited. So we hope that many of you will be interested in visiting Robinson's department store downtown 7th floor, during the next 3 weeks. Originally, the exhibition was listed for 2 weeks, but before it began, there was a request to extend it a further week, so it will be there for 3 weeks. I'd like to also call to your attention that we have on our book table this morning a number of items that we have not previously announced. I don't want to announce the titles because there's only one of each, and it may be that it is sold already, but please take a look this morning at the book table. There are several rather scarce and unusual used books available, books that we have not offered for a long time. Also, I'd like to announce that on Wednesday evening this week, we're beginning at headquarters our Wednesday evening study seminar. And the subject for the seminar this time will be Paracelsian philosophy. And if you're interested in the wonderful mysticism and scientific research of this great Swiss physician, philosopher, alchemist, Kabbalist, and mystic, I am sure you will be intrigued with the subject of this course. So far as we know, Paracelsian philosophy is seldom, if ever, discussed in modern times. Yet the need for it and the importance of it cannot be overly stressed. So we thank you very kindly, hope to see you next week, and maybe if you can, tell your friends about the show of our books at Robinson's store. Thank you very much.